where you can see it. So, all right, welcome everyone to our Connections webinar. Amy Garrettson, class of 2004, joined by some friends and colleagues today. Delighted to have you for our Connections webinar on mental well-being and especially mindfulness to move forward during the pandemic. It's a great topic and very timely as we think about, a year plus into the experience and kind of how we move forward. Happy to have Lindsay and Kristen and Sonia here with me today. Kristen is a 2004 grad of Ripon, majors in English and communication, and has a master's in social work from Loyola and is currently practice in Chicago. And Lindsay, also a classmate, is a major in art, graduated with us in 2004, and has a master's in art therapy and practices here in the Ripon and Oshkosh area as well. And Sonia has lots of hats she's wearing, but as a 96 grad of Ripon, she has a major in psychobiology and is currently working on her PhD, all but dissertation, ready to go. And so that is super exciting in industrial and organizational psychology. And she's been teaching on campus as well recently, which is wonderful. So she has a little bit of her academic hat on and her clinician hat, which is lovely. So we'll just jump right into the conversation. I think, Sonia, you're going to get us started with some body work to get us in the right frame of mind.
Hey, thank you, Amy. I'd like us to just sort of do an arrival before we begin the content. And so let's see if we can all be seated, first of all, not lying down. And make sure that you can have your shoulders back, open chest position. And in this position, we'll probably do our eyes closed. And that way you can turn inward. And have your hands, we'll have one hand, left hand on the chest, right hand on the belly with the eyes closed. And we'll just do some mindfulness of breath so that we can ground and have a mindful arrival into the webinar. So first, I'd like you to take a deep inhale from the belly and allow the hand on the belly to rise up and moving up towards the chest. And then feeling that hand rise up naturally. And as you take that out breath, just allow the out breath to go from the top all the way down to the belly. So inhale as if you're blowing up a balloon, inflating the belly up towards the chest. And then as you exhale, it's like deflating a balloon. Try that on your own for a few breaths. And then I'd like you to just remove your hands gently and still with your eyes softly closed, still remain with that breath. And instead of just thinking about breathing and mindfulness and meditation, really feel it. So we're not just thinking it, we're really feeling it as if it's the very first time that you took a breath. It's always there for us, 24/7. And with just gratitude and appreciation, send your body appreciation for being here, making that choice to call in, and committing to healing. And then finally, feel the feet on the ground, and we'll ground. So the soles of your feet are connecting 3, 4, 5 feet below you, not just at the ground, but through the ground. And allow that to connect to your breath. Feel what it feels like to have the earth be like a magnet, pulling you, grounding you. And this is where you can find confidence and courage. And then take a nice deep breath again, just like how we did, all the way from the belly up towards the lungs. And then with that out breath, you can gently open the eyes. And then there's also a post-meditation practice that I just like to mention briefly, that you don't want to go from meditation and then all of a sudden check your emails, which is pretty tempting, I know. So if, after meditation, just look around the room and feel the temperature of the air and just kind of take in, so that your senses aren't completely, stimulated right away. So I'd like to turn it over to Kristen, but before I do, I'd like to just say one poem. And I think it'd be really great to I think it'll lead right into what you're about to go into. So this poem is by Juan Jimenez, and it says, "My boat struck something deep. Nothing happened. Sound, silence, waves, nothing happened. Or perhaps everything happened. And I'm sitting in the middle of my new life." And so I think we're all in the same boat. And I'll turn it over to you, Kristen.
That's intense. I really like that. And one of the things I keep hearing from clients and from friends and colleagues is we're not necessarily in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. And I think that ties in nicely to sort of how we wanted to frame a little bit in, thinking about mindfulness and moving forward. Well, moving forward from what? And as we talked about this day and what we wanted to cover, for many of us in the mental health field, what we really want to talk about is the pandemic as a traumatic event in all of our lives. And like that metaphor, it's a trauma we're all experiencing, but we're experiencing differently based on what kind of boat we're in. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about what we're saying and meaning when we're talking about trauma, because we use that word, I think, pretty fluidly and pretty loosely, and it's in the popular press a lot. And so when we're talking about it, though, quite simply, and Lindsay, you said this very well the other day, a trauma is anything that overwhelms the body's ability to cope, and anything that overwhelms our capacity to sort of know what's real, and to know that we're okay. It really throws us and our understanding of the rules of the universe into question. And these can be big, discrete, isolated events, catastrophic events, or they can be ongoing situations that really degrade us over time. We talk about in our field the idea of complex trauma, which is a set of enduring conditions that is subjectively a threat to life, bodily integrity, or sanity. And I think when you think about what we've been enduring as a society and as individuals and as communities over the past year, is absolutely a complex trauma, a set of enduring conditions that has been a threat for many of us to our bodily integrity, for many of us to our sanity, and to our ability to sort of live and expect life to unfold as we sort of believed and intended it would or should. And so the one other sort of framing concept I want to think about is sort of this, what we talk about as a window of tolerance, and that all of us have the capacity to cope. And some of us have this capacity, some of us have a much larger window, and some of us have a much narrower window. And that can be based on our histories, our temperaments, our physical or mental health, our social support systems. And so for some of us, again, all in different boats, and all of us have different windows. And so for some of us, we've endured this rather well, or some of us, it's been more overwhelming than for others. But when we get out of that window, our ability to cope sort of degrades, and we're forced to make accommodation internally. And sometimes that means splitting off parts of the experience. And so in order to move forward, we really have to find a way to be present with what's happening, to make sense of what's happening, to sort of get our bodies back online and able to cope with what's happening. That's sort of what we want to think about, is not just moving forward as if it's over, but sort of how do we live through it in a way that, right, that it becomes integrated, it becomes a part of us, and we are growing and developing and are emerging resilient from this, as opposed to moving on away from it. So with that, I will open it up for conversation or reflection from my other panelists, if you guys want to dialogue about anything I kind of put out there.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of us keep saying or thinking or hearing, just get back to normal, get back to how it used to be. We can't. That's not a reality. And I think integrating mentally, emotionally, and spiritually and physically that reality of it's not going to go back to what it was, and it can't. And so how do I move through this and these experiences within my window of tolerance, or like you said, when we're out of that window of tolerance, that ability to cope, and we start kind of splitting things off, how do I honor those different experiences and those different parts of myself? It's really about integration, which is what you're saying, Kristen. It's about integrating these experiences as our new truth and as our new reality. And once we can work to integrate, again, mind, body, spirit, we will continue to move through. And we might even see our window of tolerance open up even a little bit more. And these traumas that we're experiencing, and the complex trauma, is really what will end up carrying us through this and coming out of this with a new understanding and appreciation for what we are capable of as a species.
Well, and I can speak to like the organizational level as well. And I love the fact that, Kristen, you brought up that everybody has a different window. And I think employers and supervisors and managers really need to address that, because it's not going to be, as far as healing the system goes in organizations, we're going to have, dare I say, task force. I feel like it needs to be sort of like a wisdom council or something instead of like, we're not fighting something, right? We're trying to heal something. So I think we need to address the fact that every employee or student is going to need something different in that process because of what you said. It's not going to be a one size fits all. However, we do need to come back and let love be bigger than fear.
Mm-hmm. So bringing up fear, right? That ties well into part of what this discussion is kind of that brain development. And last year we were, and for many of us, we still are in a state of survival. You know, we're back in our primitive brain. So the way that our brain develops, Sonia, do you have your mug? We can like show the brain. So our brain, right, develops from back to front, and that back part of our brain is survival. These are our primitive instincts, which is why we saw people hoarding toilet paper and going out for water. We don't know what to expect, but we know that we want to survive. So we are just going to grab what's available to us. And the second part of brain development is the emotional part of the brain. And that emotional part, I think many of us are still in. We're kind of in this place of survival and emotion, and we're seeing higher rates of emotional burnout and compassion fatigue. And we can't discredit that. Our third part of the brain to develop, the thinking brain, isn't online fully. It can't be, because we are not in the clear by any means, unfortunately, when it comes to this pandemic. We're still in the midst of this trauma. It's shifting, it's changing, it's looking different. It feels like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But until we really have stability as a society, we can't fully begin to heal. So right now it's symptom management. If I am feeling tired, I need to listen to my body and lay down and rest. If I am, feeling stress, I need to look at how to manage that stress and these thought patterns that are coming in, because our body in survival mode is all about our nervous system. It makes our nervous system run so that we can survive. And all of us have an overactive nervous system right now.
So what do you do, Lindsay? Right? If all of a sudden now you're like, oh, we're still way back. We're not nearly as far along as I felt like we were,
Right.
we should be, but what does that mean? And how do people move in the right direction, even if it's really slow,
Mm-hmm.
a lot longer than they think? How does that affect everyone?
Well, I think, like we're all saying, it's a really individual process. We all have different windows of tolerance. Some people are thriving in this because of their life experiences. Other people feel very, very stuck and discouraged because of their life experiences. So, the last webinar on yoga, getting back to the body, paying attention to our body and that central nervous system. We call it the vagus nerve. And vagus is, it's a wandering nerve. It starts at our brainstem and it goes all the way through our body. And we can do really simple things to activate that vagus nerve. You can think of our nervous system as having a gas pedal and a brake. The vagus nerve is the brake system. And for a year now, over a year, our nervous system has been pedal to the metal on the gas. We have been in overdrive. And that's why many of us feel like we can't, like we're stuck or we're tired. We just can't handle one more thing because we are exhausted. Our nervous system is go, go, go. Little things to activate that vagus nerve: splashing cold water on the face, listening to certain hertz of music. So 528, and what's the other one? 432. So 528 hertz, 432 hertz. YouTube it, let them play. That music taps into that vagus nerve and it helps cleanse the nervous system and it helps put the brake on. Making it a point to go for walks to activate the vagus nerve, eating more potassium and magnesium to activate the vagus nerve. And this is all stuff, if you just even, hop on the internet and search vagus nerve and how to activate it, you'll get a lot of ideas.
It's also one of the thoughts that we're having about why therapy is helpful and useful, because of this sense of sort of what we talk about as co-regulation, which is really common in sort of thinking about child development and parenting, that a parent's job when a child is sort of dysregulated or emotional or having a tantrum, for example, the parent's capacity to stay grounded emotionally and physically is what allows a child to learn to regulate their emotion. And so if you're in therapy, a lot of what a therapist has the capacity to do is when someone is anxious or overwrought or stressed out, just the physical presence, someone's capacity to be with your strong feelings without themselves getting sort of activated by them, has that capacity to bring us back into our window of tolerance, activate the vagus nerve, and then we can, as Lindsay was saying, sort of think and reflect and make meaning of what's happening rather than just be in our feelings. And so that's one of the things to think about. What I hear all the time: I don't have time for therapy, or what's someone going to tell me that I can't already know myself? I know I'm stressed, whatever. There are aspects of being in a therapeutic relationship that are more than what gets said. And it's more than a conversation that you have with a girlfriend or your husband or your partner. And so that's part of that system and how we're designed biologically to seek support and community and relationship in order to survive.
So with all of it, right,
Go
so
ahead.
it's survival. Did you have something, Lindsay? Sorry.
I was just going to take it back to Sonia for a second and ask her a little bit more about, what Kristen is saying. And just as we can co-regulate, we can co-dysregulate. And so when we have systems or organizations or schools that are stressed and dysregulated because there's so much out of their control, what can we as systems or leaders in those organizations do to help co-regulate instead of dysregulate?
I was just sitting back listening to both of you. I'm like learning so much too on an individual level. But the systems, yeah. So I think probably I like the idea of, well, one of the biggest gifts that we can give people is our presence, which actually aligns with what Kristen just said. That therapeutic relationship is probably more than half of the healing. So, being healing our teams, right? Healing our departments, our schools, our teachers, our systems. I think it brings it back to like, how can we be heliotropic, which is life-giving? When your plant goes towards the sun, that's heliotropic. So what are those environments that we can nurture, and what are those environments that we can create in the workplace that are more heliotropic? And it starts with the HR, and it starts with leadership, getting people back to like coworkers supporting each other again. A lot of us, we're motivated by, money incentives, but what about the other stuff? What about the intrinsic stuff? What about the non-monetary stuff that is going to help us heal? For incentives, not siloing in our pain, making sure that teams and departments can start talking to each other. How about narrative therapy? Reauthoring this healing story of the organization, so that we're wevolving, right? Those are kinds of things that I come up with in my head, instead of, using words about healing individually, can we use more bridging words, healing together? And also why we should be able to share our stories of how we've processed this pandemic too.
Thing that comes to mind, Sonia, and I was just thinking as you were talking, is how important is it? And I think you're going to say it's very important. And I agree as not a therapist in the room, but when you think about, we've all been through this one thing. Now, I'm guessing, that happens in some instances, right, where people may have shared experiences, but this is on a massive level. And so how can you use that to the benefit of all of us, right? Of that community building and understanding of, my experience is one thing, but you've also had an experience with the same pandemic. Now, they might be different, but how can we use that to our advantage when we're thinking about, in our community and in parenting and in our work? How does all that fit together?
Isn't this a great opportunity for us to practice diversity and inclusion and equity and listening to all the voices and the stories? This is an opportunity to engage.
Well, and it's such an opportunity to develop and stay really connected with empathy. I think that's one of the biggest things is when you can imagine yourself in someone else's shoes, you can really create that bridge and that sense of a shared humanity. And one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking, Sonia, was sort of the loving kindness meditation as a practice. And what that does is you sort of start, and I'm not an expert at all, but another thing like you could Google and find on YouTube very, very easily. But that you start with this meditation and provide sort of loving kindness inward towards yourself. And sometimes that's really difficult. But then you sort of imagine sending loving kindness to someone you love very much, like a child or a partner or a parent. And then you imagine sending loving kindness out to someone you don't know that well. And then you imagine sending loving kindness out to someone you actually actively dislike. And you sort of expand yourself and imagine just all of us sort of deserving that same level of acceptance and compassion. And it has a real impact over time and just sort of opening our hearts and opening our capacity to connect with other people. I did it one time in the pandemic, and I was working at my in-laws condo, and my person who I didn't know very well, I used the doorman of their building. And every time I went there from then on, seeing that doorman, it just brought this big warm smile and like warmth in my heart. And I felt this sense of just shared connection and humanity with this person. They had no idea. I wanted to hug them every time I saw them, and they were like, they had no idea why. But that's the sort of spirit and energy we can actively cultivate right now, that will serve not only us, but like our world so much downstream from where we are right now.
I think metta meditation, loving compassion, loving kindness, compassion meditation it hits the brain level, like what Lindsay was talking about too. I mean, in 8 weeks, you can change the brain with that meditation. That is kryptonite. So I'm more than happy to take the group through that, if we had a few minutes, for sure.
We can do that at the end as like the closing, Sonia. What do you think? It's just a way to send everyone off for the rest of their day, and something we can definitely think about, how we could share that in other ways, especially probably across campus and
go change the world.
Yes, we're going to change it from right here and on campus. Good. Lindsay, were you going to chime in with something?
I was, I'm again, just sitting back in awe of the brilliant minds on this panel. And what I keep also going back to, we use these terms and these words like compassion and empathy, and taking even our words back to their basic level. Compassion, literally, one of the definitions is a suffering together. And so you don't even have to be the nicest person to have compassion for your neighbor, because you are suffering in this pandemic with your neighbor or your enemy. And so you do have the capacity to be empathetic, like Kristen was saying, walking in their shoes, because you are going through this with them. So really peeling back the layers of, how am I thinking about this? And if I know that compassion is a suffering together, then I can walk differently in this world, or I can view, somebody who isn't coping well, and I can't understand why they're not coping well. I can be more compassionate to them instead of irritated and annoyed.
And that brings me, Lindsay, to a lot of what the Buddhist psychology does, is that if you feel contracted, do the opposite, something that opens you. If you feel cool, do something warm. And that's where meditation comes in, is if you like anxiety, what does that do for us? It makes us usually feel like we have this self-imprisoned, spiraling feeling. So it probably would not be a good idea to open your eyes and meditate that day. Close the eyes, turn inward, ground. But if you're feeling depressed, maybe do compassion meditation. So kind of being your own little elixir in that way.
What do you think are some really impactful but small things that everyone can do when thinking about where we are now, where we've been, where we are now, and kind of how we're going to move forward? What are a few takeaways that you feel like, I think Kristen, you were saying a few things, right? Taking a walk, doing right. Like, what are the things that really can be impactful with not a lot of effort and really can start to get people thinking in that frame of mind?
One of my favorite things, which is hard to do, but once you really open your mind to it, when you are walking or when you are outside, look through things. So right now the trees are starting to bud and they're starting to blossom, and we tend to focus on the tree instead of looking through the tree and seeing the sky behind the branches. Or you pass a park bench and you notice the bench. Try to look beyond or through that bench at the ground underneath it or the water behind it. Looking through things instead of at things can really help shift your perspective. And so that's one thing that I like to do that is hard to get into, but once you start practice, it's like once you notice it, you can't unnotice it.
Another thought that I'm having is a sort of combination of like sort of a gratitude practice, and then also just like a perspective taking practice, like Lindsay was saying. For so many of us, we've had kind of what amounts to an elimination diet this year in terms of relationships, hobbies, activities, sensory stimulation, all these kinds of things. And we have a moment that is not to be squandered, that we can be really deliberate about what we let back into our lives. And I think for myself, 2 weeks ago, sort of spring sports started happening with kids again. And like, we went from no activities to like 6 things to do in 1 week. And I thought my head was going to explode and my heart's racing. And I'm like, I couldn't sleep. And it was like, oh, like this is the pace at which we used to move. And really wanting to step back from that and say, like, what really works for me? What really works for our family? What have I been really grateful for this year in our time together? What parts of being together this year, what rituals that we've developed do we really want to maintain and hold on to? And so I think that not only sort of, I think, helps build a sense of continuity between like before, during, and after, which is really important for sort of psychological health and sort of self-integrity. But also, yeah, that sense of sort of agency and deliberateness, that I'm not just like being buffeted around by these societal forces, or, that I have some agency over how my life takes shape moving ahead.
And I'll just piggyback on that, asking better questions, living in better questions. For example, waking up in the morning and asking, how do I want to feel, instead of what do I want to do? Because that will come if you do. So you ride the horse doesn't ride you. And also, I think it's important to reconnect to what you love, right, Lindsay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, there's this word called Simran, and it's about, sometimes when we go through trauma, and I think Kristen and Lindsay has said this and alluded to this quite a few times, we lose things that we love. Sometimes it just happens. It's not conscious. But just, my mom loves to color. So she's been coloring during this time. Just kind of reconnecting to what you love to do can really bring spaciousness and self-compassion. So
I have a follow-up question, and Kristen, I think, and you hit this on the head for me, as like a working parent, and we live in Ripon, which is a very small town. There's not a ton for kids to do, but obviously there are plenty of things to do. And I just think, where is the parent guilt going to come in when you as we move forward and things move forward, is if you choose not to go back to that old way of fast paced, I'm doing 5,000 activities. I can't keep up with the calendar and all of that. Where do you think that'll play in with parenting and how families move forward? And will that cause some strain in different, settings?
Yes. Yeah. But I think that's also where just even having the mentality of loving kindness for yourself, right? Like Kristen said, the loving kindness meditation starts within, and then you put it outward. And being okay with going against that societal grain and having that loving kindness for yourself of, we don't need to do it that way any longer. And I'm going to honor that truth for me and honor that truth for my children and for my family or my neighbor. And you do you, you do you, and just honor that as a strength and really something invaluable that can come out of this pandemic and what we have learned.
Makes total sense. And I don't feel like that. Again, we don't live in a big city where there's so many things and you're involved in
It's still going to happen.
But it's still going to happen. We had this conversation, this was quite a while ago, but it was like, what did we used to do like on the weekend? Right now you're just at home, we maybe go to the library, we go outside, whatever. It's easy, right? It's simple in a lot of ways. It's like, well, what did we used to do? And like, would we ever do that again? And it was just this sort of like off the cuff conversation, but it did really get me thinking about what does that mean for, the children and the families and students and just everyone of how does life look moving forward? Because it's not going to be the same. And how do you come to that realization that that's okay? And I like what you said there, Lindsay, that you have to honor what works for you, and that'll help you move forward.
Mm-hmm.
You have to care about what others are feeling, because theirs is different, right?
Mm-hmm. That window of tolerance is very different for everyone.
Yeah, it's just a lot to consider. And I think, again, we're about out of time, but I know we started late, and I appreciate everyone kind of sticking with the password issue. So I apologize for that. But I was curious if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask specifically. I will share out the recording, so we'll kind of catch back up the beginning of our talk, really focused on COVID, specifically the pandemic, and really the impacts it has as a traumatic event and a trauma that people are experiencing in many ways, but that we're all experiencing. And so that's kind of where the discussion began. But I'm happy to take any questions either in the chat or the Q&A, and looking forward to some kind of final thoughts that you ladies have as well. So we'll let everyone give a second for a question if you have one. But the question I have been asking kind of this whole spring cycle of thinking about how we move forward and beyond the pandemic and all of that, how we can stay well is, what are the things that in the work that you all do and in the experiences that you've seen and had, what are some of those things that will never, you feel like are always or forever changed? And what do you feel like, you're ready to get back to, in past, how things used to be, and how is it going to change moving forward?
Kristen, you're unmuted. You get to go first. I just said that as I was muted and then realized I'm muted.
So it'd be great if we could not say you're on mute every meeting. That does happen, right? Everyone's tired of that. But in the work and in the practice, and right, we had a little bit of conversation ahead of the meeting about just virtual versus in person. What does that look like? Or are there other things that you can take away as maybe a long-term change that you see coming that the pandemic forced, but now you're kind of be like that for a while?
One thing that comes to mind quickly in the industrial organizational part of it is we're probably going to see organizations and companies realize how much money they saved with, people working from home. So our homes are going to have to be work ready. I think we're going to have a little bit of that happening. And then I think you're going to see probably, what I actually like is that the e-learning is getting more respected. Is that the remote learning is getting more respected. I understand there are some downfalls to it as far as accessibility and things, but there's also some really great benefits to it. So I don't think that's going to change. I think if anything, that's going to go on and up. So sort of my first thoughts, but then I'm going to hand it to Kristen because she's unmuted.
My hope is that this has exposed a lot of sort of underlying conditions in our society and in our community and in our country that are hopefully now we're unable to ignore them. We've done a good job ignoring them for a long time, so that's why I say I'm hopeful. But I do hope that things about sort of healthcare equity, income inequality, race, again, the ways in which this pandemic has been experienced in fundamentally different ways for people situated like I am, who are able to work from home and have a safe home and have schools for my kids to attend, and others. And so my hope would be that, I think based on kind of what we're talking about, that we don't just paper over this experience as a there and then, but that we actually do the work of developing and growing and building back, what's that phrase? Building back better and stronger. And then we have some real post-traumatic growth as opposed to just damage.
Can I ditto? Can I ditto? I ditto.
So so, right, you don't want to gloss over like, oh, that's over, it happened. And I think, right, it's people moving on too quickly. How do you manage then to get people to step back? Because you're so eager to get back, right, to the normal. How do you get people to pull back and say, no, we still got work to do, and we can't just gloss over kind of how things have been and move forward, right? That's where I'm feeling like, but what do you do, and how do you convince people that that's important?
I think, along with a hope for what everybody has been experiencing is that we all learn to get back in our bodies. Really. I mean, I know I sound like a broken record, but we've gotten so disconnected from brain body, and they do have a really important working relationship. And our body will tell us what it needs and what we need in order to thrive. And so learning how to listen to our body and pay attention to what's happening within us so that we can be healthier in our mind going forward is a huge hope that I have for life after this. If my anxiety, like Kristen was saying, if your anxiety is creeping up because now you have 6 things to do in a week, listen to that. That is your body telling you, slow down. We liked it better when we weren't busy, things like that. Or I'm breathing deeper because I've had to take a lot of deep breaths to get through this. Listen to that body, so I just really hope that we will pay more attention to what our physical self is telling us. And when you heal your body, you heal your mind.
I think, right, it's so simple, but it makes so much sense intuitively, right? To say, like, if I'm physically feeling well, I should mentally feel, right, that will come. And I think that's a great piece of advice to kind of end on is, right, really listen to yourself and your body. It doesn't matter, right, any of your situation, your demographics, your age, anything like that, right? Where you are physically, if you're listening to your body, you can move forward in a positive way and kind of take that all in. Is that what I'm?
Yeah. Yep.
Amazing, right? It doesn't matter who you are, what you're experiencing. If you just are cognizant of that one thing, that will get you on the right path.
Yeah. Like you take a nap and you wake up, oh, that nap felt so good. Okay. Your body's telling you, you need to rest more.
Right.
Or, oh, it was so good to talk to that friend on the phone, or, do more of that. So listening to your body, both, positively and negatively, for lack of a better term,
Right.
It's talking to you. So listen to it.
Yeah.
I think we wear a badge and honor in this society of the more busy you are, the more important you are. So if we can learn that that is not a scale you might not want to live on.
Yeah.
Right. I like the fact that when somebody calls me, I would like to be able to say, you know what, I am so busy doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would be wonderful, awesome. Right? There's a t-shirt for all of us.
I have all the time in the world to talk to you. I love that. Well, I appreciate it so much, just the conversation about, again, where we are and again, how you start thinking about moving forward, but being mindful that it's not over, it's a long haul and there's a lot of work to do, but it's definitely doable and it's achievable and it's definitely possible with a good support system of any kind. And I just appreciate the conversation. I think it's been a really nice touch point, something for us to share. Again, I apologize to all of our attendees who were not able to get in on time, and that is totally my fault. I'm going to go check out my Zoom account after this, but I will send out the full recording so that you can catch up and we can definitely continue these conversations if there's ongoing interest as well. So I appreciate it and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.